Wargaming have introduced a brand new tank into World of Tanks, the A43 Black Prince, and today we're going to check out why this tank is the mini Maus at tier 6. I'm going to have a look at two gameplays for you to check out now. The first gameplay is here on Pilsen, probably one of the better maps for heavy tanks to be able to use their armour and to get into close quarters engagements, and we're going to showcase why this tank is going to be able to actually perform very well, and you can pick it up in the season pass for free, I believe, at level 60 or 65 or somewhere around there, and you'll be able to get that fairly easily if you've been staying on top of this season. And of course we still have about a month left of this season until it ends, so I'm sure many of you are going to be able to complete this with ease this season. Anyway, the A43 Black Prince, of course we've got the new skin on it that Wargaming have introduced into the game, but why is it the mini Maus, or what we titled the video? Well, that is because it has a Black Prince's armour on the hull of the tank, and that allows you to actually side scrape really well, and that is where this tank, in comparison to a lot of premium heavies within the game, allows it to actually side scrape. Now, as with all of the British heavy tanks within the game, yeah, you're not going to be able to actually bounce that many rounds, and why the majority of tier 6s come a little bit unstuck against some of those heavy tanks at tier 6 and tier 7, and when you're coming up against higher tier vehicles. However, since this has that Black Prince armour, when you're coming up against tier 7s and the majority of tier 6s, you're not really going to be getting penned that easily, at least when they're aiming at the hull of the tank, and that's something we'll have to talk about. If you want to take one of these tanks out within the game, you need to aim at the turret armour. The turret armour is, to all intents and purposes, pretty terrible, and so if you're coming up against one of these things and you can see the turret armour of it, then you want to be aiming at that. Now obviously with this, you can see us actually side scraping or trying to hide the lower plate of this vehicle against the heavy tank number 6, which is the Tiger for the Japanese line at tier 6. Yeah, an interesting one, but it just cannot pen us, and that's where going hold down, avoiding people being able to see that lower plate that you do have, which is big, prominent, and also that flat plate at the front, that allows you to really bounce a lot of rounds, and you can see already here we've picked up a lot of bounce damage, over 1,500, which is really nice. That's almost 2 times the hit points of our vehicle, and with a tank like this being able to just lock people down with a fast rate of fire that this tank has, and a pretty consistent alpha damage, you're looking at about 150 per shot, I believe, and so yeah, it really can push out that damage quickly as well. Yes, compared to some of the medium tanks and the tank destroyers at this tier, you don't have very good DPM, but for a heavy tank you do. And talking about that, obviously making sure that you're bouncing rounds, keeping your gun to the fight a lot longer will allow you to actually have a better game overall, because you know you survive longer than a lot of the medium tank probably will within the game. And you can see here within this one, we have not maintained any damage throughout this entire game, and that's because we're angling in the effective way, where we can actually angle towards both the opponents that are going to be able to actually look at us, and that is aiming for the angling for the left hand side, whilst also maintaining at least somewhat of an angle for the right hand side where this Nashorn is. And if we can do that, and that's for every single game that you play, you know, it doesn't have to be in the A43 Black Prince, as long as you're angling towards all of the opponents, or at least intending to angle against as many opponents as possible, you will survive longer, and so I really do want to focus on telling you guys that. Obviously within this game we've picked up 1,500 damage, and we've also bounced 2,000 damage as well, so that's really nice to see. And with the tier 6 you don't often bounce that much damage, so when you do it becomes even more rewarding. As you can see, we're just trying to hit that Citadel there and take him out, because as soon as we can do that, the better, because that's going to allow us to actually progress through this rank and be able to do something a little bit more than just sitting here being the sponge for your team, which essentially you are as the Black Prince at tier 6. And also, as this, it's also keeping fire of a lot of your opponent's health from being actually taken out from that fire from a lot of the enemy tanks, and therefore, you know, your teammate is surviving longer. If you can sustain 3,500 block damage, it's going to be even better, because, you know, that means it's 3,500 damage, either damage to you that would have been done or damage to your teammates, and so you can really help out your team even if you just become a bullet sponge for a lot of the enemy tanks. Anyway, regardless of that, we've also got the ability to kind of get around the map. You know, this is not a tank that's going to be doing 10 kilometers an hour. Yes, it is a very slow tank, so you are going to take 10 years to actually turn, and so I would recommend actually putting on some of the equipment. I believe the the one that's going to improve your turret traverse and your track traverse, because when you do get out traded, or at least out traversed by a lot of the enemy light tanks, it becomes very, very painful and apparent within the gameplay. Of course, in this gameplay we are not using that, and so if we were to get out traversed by a lot of medium tanks, which can easily do that, this tank is very, very slow and one of the key weaknesses of the tank itself. But what we can do is obviously push forward and try and angle as much as possible, and therefore you also need to be thinking about which direction you're going to be taking the tank into and whether that is actually going to be worth it in the long run. Obviously you can see here we hit the Panzer IV-H, who's trying to retreat into a better position, but we managed to catch him out. Now what you'll notice is actually the tank has a lot of rounds, so you can continuously fire. You don't have to really be cautious about how many rounds you're firing in this tank because you have so many, and that is really, really good. And you can see just there the Citadel trying to hit us there, but he doesn't manage to do anything off the tracks and take him out of the game. And 1900 damage in a tier 6 may not be the biggest result you're ever going to see, but what we're trying to showcase here is that the tank can be really useful in getting your team the win if you decide to be that bullet sponge and really help out the team. And of course we do pick up the final damaging hit on the enemy team and win the game for our team. And of course what you'll notice is that we didn't take any damage throughout that entire game, considering we blocked 3,500 damage within the game. That is pretty outstanding, and you can showcase that the armour of this tank definitely does work if people don't know that weak point on the top of your turret, which is pretty much the flat turret of this tank. The second gameplay we have on this video is of course playing on Mountain Pass, and we're going to be able to have another fantastic game showcase the armour model of the tank, whilst also trying to explain how you can use this tank within your games, even though it isn't the fastest and it may not have that turret armour. But if you can use everything else about it and put yourself into a position where you can use all of the benefits of the tank, you can negate a lot of those negatives, and you can come out with these really good games within World of Tanks console. Obviously what we want to do in this match is we're not going to be able to cross. You cannot cross on Mountain Pass in a tank this slow at the beginning of the game. And so what we're going to do is we're going to make sure that we aren't going to do that. So that's for one. If you're in, say, a fast heavy tank, or you're in a medium tank that has pretty good mobility, yes, you can cross over to the left hand side, or I should say the southwestern side of the map, where you see that light tank in J3/2, and that is where you can go, and that is a key important area of the map. But when you're doing 20 kilometers an hour and you're going side on to pretty much the entire team that's going to be camping over there on the opposite side of the ridge, yeah, you're going to lose probably 90% of your hit points if you don't get trapped and caught out in the open. And you 100% as a heavy tank that is this big are going to get spotted by anyone on the enemy team. So don't go over to the left hand side if you are trying to begin in the game in a tank this slow. I'm not saying you shouldn't in some of them, but definitely in this game. Now that we're over on the actual map specific information, what you can see us doing here is instantly we are side scraping. And considering that we know that predominantly the enemy team are going to be sat in a position like that Hellcat 105, we can blind fire. It's a very, very common position, and if you haven't played Mountain Pass before, this is a position which the enemy team, they might not be spotted. They might not be spotted for the entire game. They may not even be there. But if we can use the DPM of the tank and reload, you know, we have a pretty good reload. So firing at this Hellcat 105, who may or may not be there, is going to be a good use of our time. And considering we can't hit anyone else, it doesn't really make much of a difference. Now you see all of the rounds coming in there. If our team had the ability to spot them, we would have 100% helped out the team there, because what we would have done is taken a lot of those shells coming in, blocking over 1000 damage, would have allowed our team to then use their view range to spot the tanks when they fired, which would have been really, really good. Now, unfortunately, that doesn't happen within this game. It's something that would have helped the team, and having the advantage to do that would have been good as well. And what you notice is we haven't had particularly the highest alpha damage game within this one. 296 damage is pretty weak, to be honest with you. But what we have done is blocked again like the previous game, 1400 damage within a pretty limited amount of time, and you won't be able to do that in a lot of the tanks that you're playing within the game. Saying that, we have got ourselves in a little bit of a pickle now. We are on our own against whatever is coming on the other side of the kind of ridge from where we are, straight ahead of us, dead ahead of us now, and so it could be very, very bad. And I guess we'll take this moment to actually highlight the fact that there are 3 of our team who decided to cross in a tank that is just far too slow to be able to do so. And so, yeah, it was definitely a benefit for us to not go YOLOing in. Now, this is where I do enjoy playing this tank. Can't be done on every single map, but we have managed to get into a position where we've got enemies advancing who don't have the armour to be able to bounce any of our shells, and so we can just continually and religiously put rounds into them. And you can see here we've got a KV2 and a Valentine. Valentine at tier 6 just doesn't have armour, at tier 4 maybe, but yeah, definitely not against us, and so we've got to be a little bit careful. Obviously KV2 is trying to fire at us. It appeared that with the first shot that he tried to put onto us, he had AP, which is a very, very bad thing for him, because yeah, every time he pokes, he may or may not be able to penetrate the armour of the A43 Black Prince, and so it's going to be very, very painful for him to do that. And what you'll see me doing here is sidescraping off of the rock. At any opportunity you can in a free tank like this, you want to be able to do that, because essentially what you're doing every single time that you do it is minimising the amount of damage you could potentially take within the game. And as much as you can do that, whatever the case may be, that's going to at least, it could be 1 in 100 shots that you don't take. But considering it doesn't take any more effort to do so, it's definitely worth it. That's going to be one of the best things that you can do within the game. And what you see me doing here is we've basically removed the KV85 from the game. We've just completely removed his hit points out of the game, which is good. We also know that the KV2 is moving up, and so we've got to make sure that we don't forget about him and then he ends up biting us in the backside, and so we'll just put a nice round into the KV85. And once again, we've not taken any damage within this game. 900 health points still remain, and that may or may not be the case until the very end of this game. And we did pick up a very nice amount of damage as well, which is always good. I'm telling my teammates to advance, but it doesn't matter, and we managed to pick up a nice damage result as well, and showcase just that this tank, although being one of the slowest tanks, its armour model can work. And when you're coming up against tier 8s, maybe not so much, but when you're playing in the top tier games or you're playing in tier 7 games, you can make it work as long as you're talking about and using the tips that we've used. And yeah, 2,261 damage, 2,085 blocked. An amazing result really for a heavy tank that was on Mountain Pass, probably not one of the better maps for heavy tanks in the game. Just make sure that you use those tips that we've been talking about, and if you want to check out any kind of other gameplay videos of World of Tanks console, I recommend these ones that are on screen right now, and I hope you join me there. Goodbye.